President Biden's prize student loan forgiveness program was put on hold this past Friday after a federal court of appeals for the Eighth Circuit temporarily blocked the initiative from going forward until legal challenges brought against it in 6 GOP states play out.
As of last Friday, some 22 million Americans have already applied for loan forgiveness. Biden could be dealt a major blow should the program be permanently halted, and Democrats will surely feel it too, especially among young voters. A recent NBC News poll shows that if young Americans make it to the ballot box this November, Democrats stand a chance in the midterms, and if they do not vote, the GOP will win. Here to discuss how Biden's plan is hanging in the balance is Democratic strategist Ameshia Cross. Welcome, Ameshia.
Thanks so much for having me.
So here's my question. Voters can't really hold it against Biden if something he tried to do for them was blocked by the courts. So do you feel that this will impact the midterms or that this will impact elections going forward? Do you feel that voters will hold this against President Biden if it is not enacted, or that they will see his attempt to do something for them and respect that?
Absolutely. And first, I'm going to level set here just a little bit. This is a delay, not a block. And with that being said, I think it speaks volumes that the Supreme Court itself has not moved to block this. So we're looking at basically a procedural focus that was expected by this administration, by the Department of Education. Everyone knew that those Republican states were going to push against this and that this would more than likely happen. With that being said, we're still watching millions of borrowers apply for forgiveness or apply for relief every single day. And I would also argue that we have to move this outside of the younger voter spectrum, because even though it's marketed and a lot of the conversation has been around younger voters, quite frankly, this also appeals to Parent Plus loan borrowers, which are the parents of those who have already borrowed, as well as many people who are millennials. And right now, we know the oldest millennials are already in their early 40s. So we have to be very strategic about who we're having this conversation about, because the majority of those who are applying, quite frankly, are older, I think, than this context of this conversation allows. But this issue is a huge one, and it goes into college affordability, one that the president has been leaning very strongly in on. When he was running in 2020, over 80% of the people polled, whether they were from blue states, red states, or purple states, they prioritized college affordability and student loan debt, recognizing that it prevents people from getting forward with their lives. It prevents them from buying homes. In many cases, it has paused people from deciding when to or if they want to start families, cars, what types of options they will have for employment, and what types of jobs they will take. All of these things go into context. So I think that in this election cycle, obviously this is important, but quite frankly, it is a president who is checking off the box of things that he literally ran on in 2020 and was being held accountable to by many of those who voted for him.
Yeah, I personally would love to see this policy halted, because I don't support it whatsoever. I don't know whether any of these legal challenges will amount to much. I am not persuaded at all that the HEROES Act authorizes the president to cancel this amount of student debt. That, to my mind, that was clearly about people serving in the military, and it was about delaying it. So I don't find the legal rationale that compelling. That said, I have no idea what a court will say. I think any person should be able to sue to stop this, but we've had a problem determining standing because the current the current legal or judicial philosophy of the court does not hold that just because you're a taxpayer, you are necessarily negatively impacted by a policy. That's how the Supreme Court would feel about things. If I ran the world, I would want taxpayers to be able to sue about their tax dollars being spent in Ukraine, being spent anywhere, being spent on anything. But that's just not realistically. That's not where things are. So what do you think, Batya? Do you think this could put a dent in young people turning out for Biden? I could see very progressive young people saying, you know what, the court's stopping it if that is what happens, but he didn't do enough. He could have done this earlier. He could have tried harder. I actually could see them holding Biden accountable for this.
I do think it gave him the ability to say, look, I tried, right? That sort of symbolic gesture. I did my best for you. I sort of am more on your side of this. I think that symbolic gesture showed exactly who the Democrats see as their base, which is the college-educated voter. It seems to me like it would be so churlish to hold him responsible for the actions of the court when the Biden administration has worked so assiduously to make sure that there is no plaintiff who has standing to sue, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I do feel that it would be surprising to me for people to hold that against him.
Well, and don't you think, Ameshia, because I agree with you that this is really a temporary delay, and once the payments start going out to millions of people, I don't know how you roll that, but even if later it's decided, some judicial authority says, no, the underlying rationale for this is not legitimate, which again, I agree with, but once the money has already been paid out, there's going to be a certain point where it just can't be undone, even if the justification doesn't hold up, right? I mean, what are they going to do? They're going to make everybody who got the loan forgiveness write a check for that amount? I don't see that happening. I just don't see that happening.
This is going to be a hard sell for Republicans because the thing is, when you're talking about people who are under 45, largely those individuals have so much student loan debt. The average student loan debt in this country for a minority person graduating from college is close to $60K. So whether it was forgiven at that $10K range or $20K if they were Pell Grant recipients, that still leaves them with quite the burden when it comes to student loan debt. Beyond that, the other issue that we have is the rising cost of higher education. And that's something that the administration has not necessarily been able to tackle. But the student loan debt issue and the student loan crisis, this is the largest growing expenditure in the United States and one that is not showing any signs of stopping. So I think that we do have to pay that very close attention. And Vacha said something earlier. It's not just college educated or college graduates. To be honest, the 10 or 20K, should that forgiveness go through, which I believe that it will, the majority of people who will have their debt completely forgiven are people who never graduated at all. Well, but because a lot of our country, quite frankly, goes to college or starts higher ed process, but doesn't ever see it across the finish line. But they still have student loan debt. And sometimes that is $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, sometimes more, depending on where you went. But
we're going to make this whole problem, I think we're going to make this whole problem much worse by doing this, because the incentives now for the universities, I mean, the universities have no incentives to keep costs down.
But the universities had zero incentive before this.
So but now if we're going to move to income-based,
can't be perfection.
Well, yeah, it's going to be, but I think it's going to be even worse because of the income-based repayment component of the Biden plan. Because now, if you're not, we're going to get to a place where most people take out these loans never have any intention of paying them back whatsoever. They're going to pay whatever it is, some portion of your income for 10 years, and it's going to go away. So then why are the colleges going to raise it even more? That is a conservative argument that doesn't necessarily play out, statistically speaking, because these colleges have been raising tuition anyway, and that's been happening since the 80s. And it extrapolated and went even larger in the early 2000s with no signs of stopping, and has not been regulated largely as well. But that is a bigger problem that exists outside of this student loan debt conversation and burden that's associated with it. These individuals are not choosing lower paying jobs to get out paying student loan debt. Let's be real here. Since the mid 2000s, we had how many recessions? We've had how many economic downturns? We've had how much where individuals, quite frankly, a lot of the positions that were available for our parents or people who are a little bit younger than them aren't even available today. So we have to be very honest about what jobs are available to those graduating from college. Also, how long recessionary traits last. Because quite frankly, after the crash of 2008, it took almost 10 years for people to try to gear up and feel as though they were in an okay place. And then we hit another spot. So there's a lot of there. And it's not that people are taking jobs that are lower paying so they won't have to pay back their student loan. No. But
they're taking what's available to them.
I think it'd be one thing to do this student loan forgiveness and then also cancel the policy that creates it, which is to subsidize student loans in the first place. But we're leaving the policy intact. There'll be just as much student debt 5 years from now as there is now. And that's, I don't know how you feel about it, Vacha. I would love to get to a place where college is affordable. I don't think it should be free. I think it should be affordable the way it was 40 years ago for our parents and our grandparents' generation. You could pay your way and you could afford tuition. At some point, this went horribly wrong, I suspect, because the government started subsidizing.
There's a whole list of things that went wrong during the Reagan administration.
Well, I think part of it is that the government pays the cost of
federal responsibility and placed it on the borrower themselves and the borrower's families. And if you are someone from a low-income background or a first-generation college student, it becomes a lot more difficult for you to walk into a college or university and be able to afford it, recognizing the outcomes are statistically supposed to be better jobs, better paying, longer term economic focus for you and your family. But what we have now is a system that was basically designed for the wealthy to be able to continue maintaining their wealth, for their kids to go to school. Meanwhile, everybody else is burdened with wild tax debt.
Yeah, I guess my problem is not like I hear the problem you're describing, Ameshia, which I think is real, which is that people go to college expecting a certain standard of living as a result that would put them above the people who don't go to college, and that never materializes. And I have a much bigger problem with the fact that, 2/3 of Americans don't go to college, have no intention of going to college, and have no way of achieving that standard of living in a way that in a previous generation they might have. So I totally agree with you. That is a real problem. But to me, there's an even bigger problem. And it's so funny because there was a video circulating of AOC from a couple years ago. People were making fun of her because she had taken on this kind of like Southern preacher intonation. But what she was saying was the kind of thing that Democrats used to be their message. She was saying there is nothing wrong with being a bartender. There is nothing wrong with being a person who, drives a truck for a living, who cleans people's houses for a living. These are jobs that can be dignified if they are protected and if they pay good wages. And I feel like that used to be the approach. And now the approach is let's get everybody into college. And if they can't afford it, let's find a way for the taxpayer to pay for it. And I'm just, I agree with you. It is really sad when people take out loans thinking that they're going to be making, $250,000 a year, and they end up making, the upper limit is $125,000 a year for these loan forgivenesses, which is not a lot in New York City. Let's be honest. But I have an even bigger problem with the fact that the median income is $55,000 a year, and that those people who don't go to college have no hope of achieving that standard of living that used to be a middle class standard of living that was almost guaranteed for working class Americans. So there's two sides to it, I guess.
We got to leave it there. Thank you both. We'll have more Rising right after this.